If I had a bigger bowl, I would use my hands, because your hands are the best kitchen tools most of the time. You know what? We're just gonna use the empty apple bowl. Today, we are going to be making an apple crisp. We're going to be using a recipe that is an adaptation from Betty Crocker's Dutch apple pie. We are just going to leave the pie crust out of the recipe. So the first thing we need to do is to make our crisp filling. We need first to cut up 8 cups worth of Granny Smith apples. Depending on if you want maybe a crunchier apple in the middle or a softer apple in the middle, that will determine how big your apple chunks or slices will be. I want a little bit of crunch still to them, so I'm going to dice them or slice them medium. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's kind of a rustic dish anyway, so however you want to cut them to your heart's desire. It's okay if you have some brown spots in there. We are going to add in about a tablespoon of lemon juice. Make sure none of the seeds get in there. Now, lemon juice has properties that help keep the apples from getting more brown. The recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, but I like a lot of cinnamon, so I'm going to put in a whole teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Next, we have a 1/2 cup of white sugar and a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour. So let's give this a stir. It smells delicious already. You just want to make sure all of the apples get coated well with the flour, the sugar, and the cinnamon. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and pour this into, I like to make my crisp in my Dutch oven. You can use any oven-safe vessel that is going to fit all of your apples in there. I think we might put we'll either oil this pan or put some parchment paper in just to make cleanup a lot easier. It's okay if it's not perfect. So now let's get all of our apples in there. You don't necessarily have to smooth it out like that. I just like to have a nice even layer. We're going to set this just aside for a moment. Now would be a good time to preheat the oven to 400 degrees. Now the recipe says to use 1/2 cup of butter, which is 1 stick. I'm going to cut it up into really small little pieces, and then we're going to mix in flour, brown sugar, and some oats. The oats are not in the original recipe, but I like to, it adds a little bit more texture and some nutrients, you know, because I like to make dessert a little healthier. Kind of sneak in those nutrients, but you don't have to do that. Into that, we are going to add 2/3 cup of flour. Since this is the topping, your measurements don't have to be precise. It's 2/3 cup flour, and the recipe calls for 1 cup of flour, but since we're adding oats, I'm going to have that last 1/3 cup and use oats instead of flour. If you don't make a mess in the kitchen, did you actually bake? Okay, and then 2/3 cup of brown sugar, packed cups. I think I could have used a bigger bowl, don't you? Oh well, this is common. And then the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar or white sugar. Now, we want to bring this all together. If you have a pastry knife, go ahead and use that. You can use a fork. This recipe from Betty Crocker suggests using 2 knives. You just want to cut the butter in so you get a nice crumbly mixture. If I had a bigger bowl, I would use my hands, because your hands are the best kitchen tools most of the time. You know what? We're just going to use the empty apple bowl. See? I wasn't even getting it. There we go. Alright, now don't be afraid to get in there. Just kind of smush it. Smush it with your hands. Make sure you dig down and get everything that's at the bottom. And you kind of crumble it so that it's starting to come together like little peas is what they call it, what they say. So I mean, you could put it on like this, but I'm going to incorporate it a little more. It's okay if pieces get stuck together like this. You can just crumble it up in your hands. But that looks good. So now I'm just going to crumble it over the top of my apples now. There's going to be a lot, so don't be shy. Make sure you get those edges so that every scoop you get out of this, once it's cooked, will have some of this deliciousness on top. Perfect. And then once your oven is preheated, pop this in for 45 to 55 minutes or until the top is a deep golden brown and the innards, all the juicy, delicious apples, start to bubble. So I just took this out of the oven, and like we said, wait till it's brown on top and bubbly. Check out those bubbles. All right, well, let us wait for this to cool off a bit. As it cools, it will start to thicken a little bit. That's part of why we put the flour in the coating for the apples, so that it's just not soup. It'll be a nice thicker syrup. All right, let's do this. So it's still gonna be warm, so that if you have vanilla ice cream, which I highly recommend, I would put it with this. Let me scoop some out for us. Your apples shrink down a lot from when we put them in. Look at that. Look at that. Now, you're just going to have to work with me. Imagine a scoop of vanilla ice cream on there with that. Try it out. Let me know what you think. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see more content, subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you know when I drop a new recipe. Enjoy!